Friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. I would like to remind you that yesterday the ultimatum issued by the President of the United States of America expired. Zelensky was asked a simple question, whether Ukraine and Zelensky himself is ready to accept demands of the Russian Federation, or Zelensky and Ukraine will continue fighting with the Russian Federation, but without any support from the United States of America. Maybe he will have some support from Europe, but obviously this is not the support from the United States. So, and everybody yesterday was waiting for an answer from the President of Ukraine. And later in the evening, Zelensky gave an answer, but it wasn't something related to the 28-point plan provided by the United States of America. Zelensky stated that he would hold important negotiations with someone next week. Very difficult to understand what does it mean. Next week there will be important negotiations not only with our delegation but also with me. Earlier there were rumors of a meeting between Zelensky and Trump being prepared for this week, but then Trump stated that it would not take place until a draft peace treaty was agreed upon. So as we understand, Zelensky didn't say anything to the President of the United States of America, so that is why the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, was forced to join this game and was forced to start pushing and pressing the President of Ukraine as well. During the previous 24 hours, the President of Russia made lots of very interesting statements. Let's discuss the most important one of them. Volchansk is almost completely under the control of the Russian armed forces. In Siversk, the Russian armed forces have captured 1,700 buildings out of 8,000 buildings. The armed forces of the Russian Federation have already approached close to the city of Gulay-Pole in the Zaporozhye region. The advance of Russian fighters in this direction could lead to a collapse of the front. So this is exactly what we were talking about during the previous video, during the previous 2 or 3 days. I would like to remind you that if Russia can capture the Zaporozhye wall, then most likely Ukraine will not be able to show any resistance, and in the end, in 5 or 6 months, Ukraine would be forced to fall back from the siege of Zaporozhye itself. In some areas, Ukrainian soldiers look like homeless people and have been in this condition for more than a week. Signing documents with the current Ukrainian leadership is pointless. It made a strategic mistake by fearing to hold presidential elections. So this is another thing. The President of the Russian Federation doesn't recognize Zelensky as a legal president of Ukraine. Those in the West who want to continue stealing money together with Kiev call to continue the hostilities to the last Ukrainian. Russia wants to reach an agreement with Ukraine, but right now it is legally impossible, and the main thing is that the decisions are recognized internationally. Recognition of Crimea, Donbas and Novorossiya should be a subject of negotiations between Russia and the USA. And after all these statements, the President of the Russian Federation also issued an ultimatum to Zelensky. Vladimir Putin stated that the armed forces of Ukraine will leave the territories they occupy, and then the hostilities will cease. If they do not leave these territories, then Russians will achieve this by armed means. So the President of the Russian Federation issued the ultimatum to the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, telling him that if he don't withdraw position, if he doesn't leave these territories, if the forces of the armed forces of Ukraine don't withdraw their positions from the rest of Donetsk region, then Russia will take this territory with military means. But this time Ukraine replied immediately, not the President of Ukraine Zelensky personally, but an answer to the President of the Russian Federation was given by the second person of Ukraine, by the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak. He stated that in an interview with the Atlantic, he stated that the issue of relinquishing territorial control is not currently being discussed while Zelensky is president of Ukraine. According to Yermak, Zelensky will not sign documents ceding territory, and Ukraine itself will not relinquish its territory in exchange for peace. He also added that anyone signing such a document would be acting against the Ukrainian constitution and its people. Maybe this answer was very interesting, and maybe people of Ukraine like this answer of the second person of Ukraine, but there are lots of people who doesn't like this, who didn't like this answer. And we are talking first of all about the US authorities. And right after the second person of Ukraine made a statement about the territories and so on, the searches started at his home. Searches are underway at Yermak's home. Ukrainian media capture footage of more than 10 employees of the anti-corruption agencies NABU and SAP entering the government building. Media reports that searches have been conducted at the home of Zelensky's head of office Yermak. So we see significant pressure on Zelensky and Andrei Yermak, and this pressure has just one, let's say, purpose and one task: to force the Ukrainian authorities to accept demands of the Russian Federation and to start the negotiation process, which in the end will lead probably to complete collapse of any resistance from the Ukrainian side, and which most likely will lead to that some territories of Ukraine would be internationally recognized as the territory of the Russian Federation. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, because the most interesting weeks are just ahead of us, and most likely we're going to see lots of interesting statements and a lot of updates about corruption scandal through Ukraine. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Kherson direction. A very interesting piece of news is coming from this area. Ukrainian authorities in Kherson, which is currently under the control of the Ukraine armed forces, have begun a covert evacuation of government institutions. So the evacuation started on the territory of Kherson, which means that Ukrainians are preparing themselves before the beginning of clashes for this area as well. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Zaporozhye direction. The situation for the armed forces of Ukraine in this area worsened during the previous 24 hours. The sources are saying that the clashes are taking place already on the territory of the city of Guliai-Polye. The Russians established complete active drone control over the settlement. The Ukrainians haven't managed to stabilize the situation, and they haven't managed to bring enough of reinforcements and reserves with the purpose to stabilize the area around the city. The Russians managed to use this, let's say, these problems and this advantageous situation, and the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defense from the east and from the southeast of the settlement and to answer the city of Guliai-Polye. Currently, there are very heavy clashes. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation and continue advancing to the north of the city of Guliai-Polye towards the road R85 with the purpose to establish complete control over the, let's say, Russian side of the river by the name of Gaichul. This is the river, and over settlements through the Russian side of the river. The Russians will try to establish complete control over these territories as soon as possible, and as soon as the Russians are able to do this, then they will start thinking how to move further in the western direction. Once again, and this is exactly what the president of the Russian Federation was talking about, he said that if Russians can take under control these territories, this Zaporozhye wall, then most likely the entire front line will collapse automatically, and Russians will face no barriers until the city of Zaporozhye, and this city the Ukrainians will not be able to hold under the pressure of the Russian forces. Furthermore, during the previous 12 hours, as you can see, additional changes on the ground were recorded. So this is the situation by the end of the 26th of November, and this is how the situation has been developing during the previous few days. This is the end of the 27th of November, and this is the situation by the end of the 28th of November. According to these changes, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, improved their position significantly on the territory of the village of Dobropolye, and by the morning of the 28th of November, the Russians captured more than 20% of the settlement, and the Russians continue advancing further in the southern direction along R85 road. Furthermore, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions around the settlement of Vidradne. This time, the Russians are trying to advance in the direction of the settlements of Andreevka and Ostapovskaya. You know that the Russians can use this territory in this village with the purpose to outflank the Zaporozhye wall and to attack the Zaporozhye wall from the north. As you can see, there is a dense network of the fortifications between the city of Guliai-Polye and, let's say, the settlement of Pishana, this one, and there is a gap between between the settlement of Peshchane and the settlement of Pokrovsky. There are just villages and just 2 or 3 strongholds. That's probably is not something that can probably cause some problems to the Russian forces. So that is why the Russians may try to use this gap for offensive operation with the purpose to break through Ukraine defense very fast and to answer the settlement of Peshchane and Zarychno from the north. And then Russians will be able to begin advancing in the southern direction along the Zaporozhye, let's say, line without any resistance from the Ukrainian side, at least without very big resistance from the Ukrainian side. So we believe that something like this might happen in coming days. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Pokrovsk. During the previous 12 hours, small changes on the ground were recorded in the most northern part of the settlement. So today, pro-Ukrainian sources published a video. We will not watch the video due to significant casualties and violence during the video, but the video was geolocated exactly at this point. Ukrainians and FPV drone operators of the armed forces of Ukraine were attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation right exactly at this point. So based on this video and based on this geolocation, we came to the conclusion that the Russians managed to secure almost completely the northern part of the city, and based on the video we have adjusted the map. As you can see, these are the changes on the ground between the dates. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Siversk Liman direction. During the previous 24 hours and 12 hours, lots of very interesting and very important updates we received. First of all, and the most interesting, is that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, according to different sources, according to neutral mappers and according to reliable pro-Russian sources, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to cross the river of Bakhmutka, to cross the river of Sukha, and to capture this stronghold right along the TO513 road. So this is the situation by the end of the 27th of November, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 28th of November. This is a very important progress on the ground, and this, let's say, offensive, this advance confirms that Russians managed to cut the road TO513 physically, and now Ukrainians are no longer able to use this road for logistic purposes. So maybe they can use this road, still can use, but obviously if they use this road, they pay for this a very high and significant price. We believe that the losses along this TO513 road with this configuration of the front line would be up to 80 or maybe 90% if they use exactly this part of the road for the logistic purposes. Ukrainians still have some possibilities to use TO513 road that goes from the northwestern part of the Siversk in the direction of the city of Slaviansk, but this part of the road is also under complete control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation with FPV drones. Here we can see how Ukrainians were trying to redeploy their units from one side to another, but Russians established complete FPV drone control, and when they discovered positions of the armed forces, they were destroyed immediately. So which means that this part of the TO513 road is also under complete Russian FPV drone control. So the battle for Siversk is already ongoing. I would like to remind you that the president of the Russian Federation stated that by the evening of the 27th of November, the Russians captured 1,700 buildings out of 8,000 buildings, which is almost more than 20%, and the Russians continue advancing. We believe that the city of Siversk, due to this configuration and due to the worsening situation with logistics, may fall in Russia's hands in coming days and probably before the end of the 2025. Furthermore, during the previous night, lots of sources reported that the Russians began advancing and began assault operation on the territory of the settlement of Dibrova. Very reliable pro-Russian sources stated that Russians managed to enter the settlement of Dibrova and to dig in deeper. This is another very important piece of news, because from the village of Dibrova and from the forest around, the Russians will establish complete FPV drone control over the main logistic lines that goes from the city of Slaviansk in the eastern direction. So everything in this cloud in this area would probably be a part of a huge kill zone created by the armed forces of the Russian Federation in this area, and Ukrainians will lose any possibilities to supply their forces in the area of the Siversk, which will also intensify the entire defeat of the armed forces of Ukraine on this direction. So we're going to see lots of updates from this area coming within the next 2 or 3 weeks. The Russians will try to break through Ukraine defense here also as fast as possible, and to begin the battles for Siversk and Kramatorsk probably within even the late 2025 or early 2026. And that's it for the short video. Military with Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.